Welcome back to The Explainer. So, last time we scratched the surface of what alcohol does to your brain in the moment. Today, we are going way deeper to answer the really big question, why is it so incredibly hard to stop?
You'll remember we talked about how it's a depressant, right? How it kind of slows everything down, messing with your brain's communication network and dulling your senses.
But that doesn't really explain the whole story, does it? How does that initial, nice, relaxed feeling somehow morph into this powerful, almost desperate craving for another drink?
Well, the answer is fascinating. It turns out it's all about a hidden seesaw in your brain that's constantly engaged in a frantic balancing act just to keep you stable.
So let's talk about the brain's balancing act. Your brain has one main job, above almost everything else, to maintain a stable, neutral state. The biological term for this is homeostasis.
The absolute best way to picture this is to think of a perfectly level seesaw. That's your brain's natural set point. It's that state where you just feel, well, normal. You're not ecstatic, you're not miserable, you're just balanced.
So, the euphoric tip. What happens when you introduce something powerful, like alcohol, into this finely tuned, perfectly balanced system?
Well, it's like you just slammed a huge weight down on one side of that seesaw. Bam! Alcohol pushes it down, hard and fast, toward the side of pleasure and euphoria.
That initial buzz you feel is a massive disruption. But you have to remember, your brain is hardwired to fight back against any major swing away from its set point. And its response is about to be just as powerful as the disruption itself.
And this is where the brain fights back. See, it just can't operate normally under the influence of a depressant, so it immediately launches a full-blown counteroffensive to get things back in balance. It does this in a few steps. First, it detects the imbalance, then it kicks off a counter-response. But the coolest way to visualize what happens next is to imagine your brain deploying these little invisible gremlins, whose only job is to start piling weights on the pain side of the seesaw to try and level things out. So now we're in the aftermath. Eventually, the alcohol starts to wear off, right? Its weight gets removed from the pleasure side of the seesaw. But what about the gremlins? Well, they're a lot slower to leave. They tend to stick around.
As neuroscientist Andrew Huberman describes it, this leads to an inevitable result. You get, as he says, a blip of feel-good followed by a long, slow arc of feeling not so great. You're basically paying for that brief pleasure with a much longer period of the exact opposite.
So with the alcohol gone, but all those stress hormone gremlins still piled on the pain side, you're left in a state of dysphoria. This isn't just a vague feeling. This nervousness, this anxiety, this general out-of-sorts feeling, it's the direct chemical consequence of the drinking you did earlier.
And that leads us right into the cycle of craving. Your brain is now stuck in this really unpleasant, imbalanced, pain-tilted state. So what's the quickest, most efficient solution it knows to fix this problem?
Yep, you guessed it. Take another drink. Doing that immediately adds weight back to the pleasure side. But, and this is so important, it's not about creating euphoria anymore. It's just about temporarily leveling the seesaw to get some relief from those anxious, awful feelings.
And this, of course, creates a vicious cycle. The drinking is causing the very anxiety that more drinking seems to fix. The crucial point here is that the craving is no longer for pleasure. It's a craving for relief. It's just a desperate attempt by your brain to feel normal again.
Over time, the brain adapts. It gets tired of this wild back and forth, so it just decides to keep some of those gremlins on the pain side permanently. And you can see how this works here. The first few times you get a big pleasure effect and a mild aftermath. But with regular drinking, the pleasure drops and the pain goes way up. Until, with dependent drinking, you get almost no pleasure, just a severe aftermath. Your baseline is shifted. The seesaw is now always tilted toward pain. That's tolerance. You end up needing a drink not to feel good, but just to stop feeling so bad.
Now, this whole pleasure-pain cycle isn't just a temporary chemical state. When you repeat it enough, it physically and functionally rewires the very structure of your brain. See, your brain doesn't view this as a mistake. It just sees a pattern. And what does the brain do with patterns? It learns them and makes them more efficient. It creates these brain habits, which then lock in our mental habits, creating this powerful feedback loop where the experience changes the brain and the changed brain seeks out the experience.
And this just brilliantly illustrates a core idea from the book The Biology of Desire. It says addiction is motivated repetition that gives rise to deep learning, which is to say that addiction isn't some failure of character.
It's actually a powerful and sometimes tragic example of the brain's incredible ability to learn. The brain learns to want this one thing so intensely that it actually gouges deep ruts in our neural pathways. And this whole process of adaptation, this deep learning that prioritizes one goal above all others, is so profound that it draws a really fascinating parallel to the world of technology.
And that leaves us with a huge question. If our brains can literally learn addiction, what does that teach us about how machines learn? If addiction is a form of deep learning in our own biology, what can it tell us about artificial intelligence? Join us next time as we explore the surprising connections between the addicted brain and the future of AI.